My name is Nora Ashfield, and I am 27 years old. For as long as I can remember, my own mother looked at me through a lens and decided I did not belong in the picture. Not as a figure of speech, literally. She hired photographers for our Christmas cards every December. She reviewed the proofs at the kitchen counter the way she reviewed everything in our house, with the eye of someone who knew exactly what she wanted and had no patience for anything that fell short. She chose which image went out to 200 people on her mailing list. And every single year, the card that landed in their mailboxes had 3 Ashfields in it. My mother, my father, my sister Vivian, looking warm, looking complete, looking like a family that had everything placed exactly where it needed to be. I was not in any of them. She skipped my scene at the school play to photograph Vivian's curtain call. She handed a shot list to the hired photographer at my graduation party, and my name was not on it. When a local Connecticut magazine ran a feature on our family business, the caption beneath the photo read, "The Ashfield Family," and named 3 people. I was not one of them. When I was 19, I found my mother's Instagram account. She had been posting for 4 years by then. Interior projects, holiday tables. Vivian's milestones captured one after another. The first day of college, the first apartment, the first promotion. Each one posted with the kind of attention you give to things you are proud of and want the world to see. I scrolled all the way back to the very first post. 847 posts. I counted every single one. I did not appear in a single photograph. Not a birthday, not a graduation, not a background detail in a single holiday picture. Not once in 4 years had my mother looked at her camera roll and thought to include me. I was not an oversight. I was a decision. I was the daughter she had decided, over and over again, did not fit the image she was building for herself and for this family. She actually said those exact words to me once. "You just do not fit the family aesthetic, Nora." She said it the way you explain a design choice, calm, certain, like it was simply a matter of composition. Now here is what happened last year. A billboard of my face went up in Times Square, 48 feet wide, black and white, a luxury campaign for a brand called Meridian, one of the most recognized names in American fashion. My sister Vivian was in New York that November for a friend's bachelorette weekend. She walked through Times Square on a Saturday night, spotted the billboard, and stopped in front of it. She took a selfie. She posted it to her own Instagram with the caption, "Obsessed with this campaign. This model's face is everything." My mother liked that post within 4 minutes. The face on that billboard was mine. Vivian did not know. My mother did not know. The woman who had spent 22 years making sure I did not appear in her family photographs had just told the internet that her favorite image of the week was a 48-foot photograph of the daughter she had written out of the frame. 3 months after that, my mother walked into a gallery in Chelsea, Manhattan on a Friday evening in April. She was dressed for it. Navy wrap dress, the kind she wore to client events, the kind that said she belonged in any room she entered. My father was half a step behind her. My sister Vivian was scanning the walls before she had fully crossed the threshold. They had no idea I was in that room. They moved through the outer galleries, stopped in front of a few pieces. My mother said something to my father, and he nodded. Vivian took out her phone. None of them had reached the main hall yet. I stood near the far wall with a glass of wine I had stopped drinking, and I watched them make their way through the space. I watched my mother turn the corner into the central room. I watched her stop walking. I watched her look at the portrait on the far wall. It was 6 feet tall. It was me at 25. And it was the centerpiece of a 30-year retrospective by one of the most celebrated portrait photographers in the country. I watched my mother reach back for my father's arm. I watched her grip it. I watched the color leave her face the way light leaves a room when someone pulls the curtain. She did not know I was standing 30 feet behind her. She had no idea what was about to happen next. Before we go any further, please take a moment to like and subscribe. but only if this story genuinely connects with you. Drop your location and the time where you are in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let me take you back to Greenwich, Connecticut. Back to the house on Merritt Lane, and the first time my mother looked at a photograph of her own daughter and made the choice to cut her out. The house on Merritt Lane was the kind of house that made strangers slow their cars to look. White colonial, black shutters, a flagstone path lined with clipped boxwood that my mother refreshed every spring with the same contractor she had used for 11 years. The inside was no different. Every room arranged like it was waiting to be photographed. Every surface cleared of anything my mother considered visual noise. My mother, Diane Ashfield, had built her reputation in Greenwich on the idea that a space tells a story whether you intended to or not. She started her interior design firm when Vivian was 2 years old and I had not yet been born, running it from a converted sunroom at the back of the house before she had a proper office, taking on small residential projects and turning them into referrals, then bigger projects, then the kind of clients who wanted their homes featured in Connecticut cottages and gardens. By the time I was old enough to understand what she did for a living, she had 12 people on staff and a portfolio that included 4 properties in Westport and a Manhattan penthouse she had redesigned twice for the same client. What she did professionally and how she ran our home were never two separate things. They had always been the same impulse, the need to control what a space communicated, the belief that presentation was not vanity, but discipline. My father, Richard, sold commercial real estate out of an office in Stamford. He had a good eye for value, a firm handshake, and a talent for making people feel heard without ever saying anything that could be held against him. He was careful the way certain men are careful. Not distant, not unkind, just always one half step removed from any situation that might require him to choose a side. In our house, he had long settled into the understanding that the path of least friction was to let Diane decide and let the room find its own level. He showed up to school events, he signed permission slips, he asked about homework at dinner, but asking and listening are two different things, and he had spent enough years choosing one over the other that by the time I was old enough to understand the difference, the habit was fixed. Vivian was 3 years older than me and had arrived in the world looking the way my mother wanted the family to look. Not beautiful in a delicate way, in a photogenic way. The right bone structure, the right coloring. Even as a small child, she had an instinctive feel for cameras. She turned toward them without thinking. She held still at exactly the right moment. She understood the way some people simply understand that an image is something you choose to participate in rather than something that happens to you. By the time Vivian was 11, my mother had started treating her as a kind of proof of concept, not in any way you could isolate and name in the moment, just in the way that some children get quietly selected to represent the best version of what a family wants the world to believe about itself. Vivian was the one my mother called into the room when a client brought their spouse to a design meeting. Vivian was the one who appeared in the framed photographs on the credenza in my mother's office. Vivian was the one my mother turned toward first in every room they shared, the way a plant will turn toward the only window, without deciding to, without even knowing it is happening. And then there was me. I came out of the same house with the same last name and the same Greenwich zip code and a face that my mother looked at through every camera she pointed at our family and found, in some way she could never quite articulate and never stopped trying to, slightly wrong for the frame. Too direct, too angular, what she called striking, but not in the way she needed. She never said she did not love me. I have thought about this carefully over many years, and I believe that is true. She loved me the way a person loves something that disrupts the room they have spent years getting right, with a specific, quiet kind of resignation, with the ongoing hope that if she managed around it long enough, it would eventually stop drawing attention to itself. What she said out loud, the phrase she returned to the way people return to an explanation they have decided is sufficient, was that I did not fit the family aesthetic. I heard it for the first time when I was 9 years old. A neighbor had dropped off printed photographs from a 4th of July cookout in their backyard. My mother spread them on the kitchen table and went through them the way she reviewed design proofs, setting aside the ones worth keeping. I watched her make 3 separate piles. I noticed after a minute that not a single photograph in the keep pile had me in it. I asked her why. She looked up with the expression she used when a conversation was interrupting something she was already thinking about. "You have a very strong look," she said. "It pulls the composition in a direction that does not work for the group." It is not a criticism, Nora. It is just the way certain faces read in photographs. I was 9, and I did not have the vocabulary yet to explain what was wrong with what she had just told me. I only knew that the photographs she had chosen to keep were the ones where I was not there. I went to my room that night and turned the word composition over for a long time. I had heard her use it with clients. It meant arrangement. It meant the relationship between elements in a space. It meant what stays and what gets removed because it does not serve the overall picture. By the time I was 11, I understood exactly what it meant when she applied it to me. It meant I was the element she was always working around, the variable she could not resolve. I should say clearly that Vivian was never cruel to me at home. She was not the source of this. She was simply the one who was included, and she had grown up in a house where that was just the way things were. She did not fight for my seat at the table because she had never been asked to give it up. She had occupied the center of our family's image for as long as either of us could remember, and to her, that was not an advantage. It was simply a fact, the way the layout of a room is a fact until someone points out that one chair is always left out. I appeared in the early family photographs. I want to be accurate about that. The reduction was not there from the beginning. It happened the way certain things happen in families, so slowly and so consistently that by the time you can see it clearly, it has already been going on for years. And then the Christmas cards started. That is when the gradual reduction stopped being a matter of subtle preference and became something my mother actively arranged, something deliberate, something she chose every year with full knowledge of what she was doing and no apparent sense that it required an explanation. I was 13 the first time it happened. My mother had hired a photographer named Keith for the annual holiday card. He arrived at Merritt Lane on a Saturday morning in November with 2 assistants, a portable backdrop, and a clear sense of what my mother wanted. She had done this shoot before. She knew how she wanted the lighting. She knew which wall worked as a background. She knew where to place each of us for the best result. She placed my father by the window. She put Vivian at the center. She positioned herself at Vivian's left. And then she looked at me, standing in the doorway, waiting to be told where to go. She studied the arrangement for a moment, the way she studied rooms before she decided what to move. Then she said, "Let us try a few without Nora first." And Keith nodded and turned back to his light meter, and nobody in that room said a word. I stood in the doorway for the better part of an hour. Keith and his 2 assistants moved quickly. They knew exactly what they were doing. The lights went up. The backdrop positioned itself against the far wall, and my mother moved between directing and being directed with the ease of someone who had rehearsed this enough times that it no longer required thought. She told Vivian to angle her shoulders slightly toward the camera. She adjusted her own posture. She smiled at the lens the way she smiled at clients, warm and certain and practiced enough that you could not tell it from the real thing. My father stood where she had placed him and looked at the camera when Keith counted down. He did not look at me. Not once during that hour did anyone in that living room look at me. I understood, standing in that doorway, that this was not an oversight. My mother had not glanced up and momentarily forgotten I was there. She had looked at all 4 of us in that room, made a clear assessment of the arrangement, and communicated her decision out loud without a pause. Let us try a few without Nora first. That sentence required no apology, because in her mind it was not the kind of sentence that did. She had delivered it the way she delivered every observation about the visual elements of our lives, with the quiet authority of someone who had decided long ago that she was the final word on what looked right. After about 40 minutes, Keith said he believed they had what they needed. My mother asked to see the preview on his laptop. She stood over the screen with Vivian beside her, the two of them scrolling through the shots the way they went through everything together, trading small observations, landing on a few favorites, narrowing it down with the easy agreement of two people who had been making these choices side by side for years. Nobody called me over to look. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the ceiling. I did not cry. I was 13 years old, and I had already worked out that crying about things my mother framed as neutral decisions was a way of positioning yourself as the problem. She had a specific talent for presenting her choices as facts about the world rather than choices she had made. The composition does not work with 4 people in this particular space. The lighting favors this grouping over that one. These are professional observations, not personal ones. If you cried about them, the problem became your inability to understand the difference, not her willingness to keep making the same call. So I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about what it means when the person who is supposed to want you in the picture is the one who keeps deciding where the frame ends. 3 days later, the proofs arrived by email. My mother sat at the kitchen counter and pulled them up on her laptop. She called Vivian in. The two of them went through the options for the better part of 20 minutes. I was at the far end of that same counter eating a bowl of cereal, and neither of them said a word to me. When they had picked a final image, my mother sent the file to the print shop and closed her laptop with the particular click of someone finishing a task they had been looking forward to crossing off their list. That was the full extent of the conversation about the Christmas card. 200 cards went out during the first week of December. My mother maintained the mailing list in a color-coded spreadsheet she updated every fall. Former clients and current ones, neighbors on Merritt Lane and on the 3 streets around it, my father's colleagues from the Stamford office, friends from the club, people from the neighborhood association, the pediatrician who had been seeing all 3 of us since we were small. 200 people received a card that holiday season showing a well-dressed and apparently contented family of 3 standing in front of a lit fireplace in a house that looked precisely the way my mother had always intended it to look. I was not in it. I found out the way children often find out the things their parents choose not to say to their faces. I was at my Aunt Paula's house in early February on a Saturday afternoon, dropping off a table lamp my mother was lending her. Paula was my father's older sister and had lived in a small ranch house in Darien since her divorce in 2002. She kept her refrigerator door covered with things worth holding on to. Takeout menus from places she liked, a card from her dentist reminding her of a cleaning, a photograph of a dog she had lost 2 years earlier, a drawing a neighbor's child had made for her as a gift. And there, held in place by a magnet shaped like a red lobster, was my family's Christmas card. I stood in front of that refrigerator for a long moment. My mother, my father, Vivian. Standing in front of the fireplace on Merritt Lane, dressed in the coordinated outfits my mother had chosen, looking warm and arranged and exactly as they had looked when I was standing in the doorway watching Keith adjust his light meter. Paula came in from the hallway and saw me looking at it. She went still. I could feel her working through what to say. I asked her first. I asked her whether the card she had received that year had 3 people in it or 4. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said my name. Just that, nothing attached to it. The way people say your name when they are trying to buy themselves another few seconds to find the words and have already used up the time they had. I picked up my coat from the chair by the door and told her I had to get back. She called after me. I told her I was fine. I was not fine, but I was not going to have that conversation in her kitchen, and I was not going to let anyone in my family watch me fall apart over something my mother had already decided was simply a matter of composition. I drove back to Merritt Lane with the full length of the ride to decide what I was going to say. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had narrowed it to one straightforward question. I was going to walk in and ask my mother directly why I was not in the Christmas card. She was in her office with her reading glasses on, working on a floor plan. She looked up when I came in and waited. I asked her. No build-up, no softening. She took her glasses off and set them on the desk. She turned her chair to face me fully, which was the gesture she used when she wanted to demonstrate that she was giving you her undivided attention, as though focus were a thing she was choosing to extend rather than something that came naturally. She said the card needed to feel cohesive. She said that Keith's lighting that particular morning had been best suited to a certain range of coloring, and that the 4-person grouping had not resolved as cleanly as the 3-person one. She explained all of this with the same patient, measured tone she used with clients who had asked a reasonable question about a decision she had already made and was not planning to revisit. Then she said the sentence, "You just do not fit the family aesthetic, Nora. It is nothing personal. It is a visual thing. You have to understand the difference between those two things." She held my gaze with the expression she used when she believed she had explained herself clearly and was giving you the space to catch up. I looked at her for a moment. Then I walked out. She did not call after me. By the time I reached the hallway, I could already hear the pen moving across the floor plan again. I lay in my room that night and turned over what she had said. I thought about 200 people opening an envelope and seeing a family of 3. I thought about Paula at her refrigerator with that card right there in front of her every morning and not saying a word until she had to. I thought about my father standing in that living room while Keith worked, standing exactly where my mother had placed him, looking at the lens when told to, and not once in the days that followed finding a way to mention any of it to me. What I understood that night was not that this had been a bad day. What I understood was that a permanent decision had been made, presented to me as aesthetic logic, and was not going to be changed because I had asked about it. I was 13. The next card went out 11 months later. I was not in that one either. By the time I was 16, I had stopped walking through the room when the proofs came back. By the time I was 18, I had stopped expecting my name to appear in any caption my mother wrote, any frame she chose, any album she put together. The Christmas card had been the first time she had formalized it, with a hired photographer and a mailing list and 200 pairs of eyes. And what that formality had made unmistakably clear was that this was not carelessness. This was a choice she had thought through and arrived at and intended to continue making. What I did not yet understand was the full scale of it. I would not understand that until I was 19 years old, sitting in my dorm room at college at 2 a.m. with my laptop open, scrolling through something I had stumbled across by accident, and realizing that the Christmas cards had only been the part of the story I had been allowed to see. I was 19 when I created an Instagram account. At the time, it felt unremarkable, just a way to stay connected with people from high school while I adjusted to college life in Providence. I had enrolled at Rhode Island School of Design on a partial merit scholarship for visual arts. I told myself the distance from Greenwich was practical, that Providence offered better studio hours and a different peer group. The truth was simpler. I needed 2 hours of highway between myself and Merritt Lane. My roommate at RISD was a woman named Casey from Albuquerque, who shot film on a Pentax K1000 she had inherited from her uncle. She developed her own prints in the campus darkroom and taped them across our shared wall without any particular arrangement, just images she liked placed wherever there was space. I had never seen someone treat photographs that casually. In my family, photographs were strategic documents, each one selected and positioned to communicate a specific message. Casey just printed what she saw and put it on the wall. I started borrowing her camera on weekends. My mother launched her own Instagram account in the fall of my sophomore year. She called it a business decision, a way to attract new clients and document completed projects. By the time I discovered it, she had been posting for 8 months. I found it one afternoon while searching for a client reference she had mentioned on a call. I typed her name into the search bar, and her profile appeared immediately. The profile photo was a shot of the living room on Merritt Lane, the same room where the Christmas card photographer had set up his lights 6 years earlier. Her bio said Interior Design, Greenwich CT, and listed a website. She had just under 4,000 followers at that point. I scrolled through her feed. The posts fell into a consistent pattern. Interior shots came first, finished rooms with soft, natural light, then family content mixed in. Dinner table settings, a 4th of July gathering on the back patio, Vivian at her college orientation, my parents at a charity gala in Stamford. I scrolled further. A post from the previous Thanksgiving showed the dining table set for what appeared to be a full family meal. My father sat at one end. Vivian sat across from my mother. The caption read, "Grateful for these three, our table, our home, our everything." I was home for Thanksgiving that year. I sat at that table. I ate the same meal. I passed the same dishes. The photograph was cropped so that my chair and the space I occupied fell entirely outside the frame. I kept scrolling. I went back nearly 8 months through 60 or 70 posts that included any family content. I was not in a single one. I want to be precise about what I mean, because there is a difference between being absent from a photo and being removed from one. Absence is neutral. It means you were not there. What I found in my mother's account was not absence. There were posts from evenings I clearly remembered being present for. A birthday dinner at a restaurant in Greenwich, where I had been seated directly beside my father. The posted photo cut the frame just past his shoulder. My chair and the lower edge of my arm in a blue sleeve were barely visible before the crop line. Another post from a weekend in Cape Cod that I had attended showed my mother, father, and Vivian on a beach boardwalk. I had walked that same boardwalk 20 feet ahead of them because Vivian wanted to stop and look at the boats. The photo was taken from behind. 3 figures, not 4. I set the phone down on my desk and looked at Casey's wall of prints for a long time. She had a photograph of her own family up there, shot at what looked like a birthday party, and she was in it, slightly blurred because she had been laughing when someone else pressed the shutter. The blur did not matter to her. She put it up anyway. It was a record that she had been present. I did not have many records like that. I went back to my mother's account and counted. I did not count the interior design posts, the room reveals, the before and after sequences. I counted only the posts that documented family life, any meal, any gathering, any occasion. I found 43 of them in those 8 months. I appeared in none of them. That evening, I called my mother. She answered on the 3rd ring, sounding occupied, a background noise of classical music and what I recognized as the sound of her sorting fabric samples. I told her I had found her Instagram account. She said she was glad I liked it, that the response from potential clients had been stronger than she expected. I told her I had gone through every family post. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said the account was a professional tool, and she selected images based on what worked for that purpose. I asked her if I worked for that purpose. She said she needed to go, that she had a call in 10 minutes, and she would talk to me at Thanksgiving. She did not talk to me about it at Thanksgiving. I did not bring it up at the table because I already knew the conversation would end the same way it had always ended, with her telling me the decision was aesthetic and not personal, and me standing in a room that contained all the evidence that it was both. By my junior year, her account had grown to 12,000 followers. I checked it periodically without letting myself dwell. One post from Vivian's law school acceptance gained over 400 likes. The caption said, "Our family is so proud." The comments were full of congratulations directed at my parents, at Vivian, at the Ashfield family. By then, I had been shooting portraits in a rented studio space near campus for 18 months. I had no professional account of my own. I had no platform. I was not sure yet what I was building, only that I was building something. The shooting helped. It gave me a reason to look at people directly and a frame through which to understand what I saw. I graduated from RISD in May with a concentration in photography and a thesis project called Cropped, a series of 14 large-format portraits showing the edges of photographs where someone had been removed. I used digital reconstruction to suggest the presence of a missing figure in each image, not their face, just the shoulder, a hand resting on a table, a shadow cast across the floor. The thesis committee called it technically accomplished, and emotionally resonant. My mother did not attend the ceremony. She sent a card with a Nordstrom gift card inside. The card said, "Congratulations," and was signed with her first name. My father came. He sat in the third row. After the ceremony, he shook my hand and told me the work looked professional. He had not walked through the thesis exhibition, or if he had, he did not mention it. We stood outside the auditorium for about 7 minutes before he said he needed to get back, that the drive to Greenwich was long on a Friday. I watched him cross the parking lot and get into his car. He did not look back. I stood there, holding my diploma in a cardboard sleeve, and thought about the photograph my mother would post when Vivian graduated from law school the following spring. The wide shot of the family gathered on a campus lawn, 3 faces turned toward the camera, 4 people in the actual moment, 3 in the record. That was the last time my father and I spoke before I moved to New York. And that move was not an escape. I want to be clear about that. I did not leave Greenwich because I was running from something. I left because I had decided to step into a frame no one else was managing, where the composition was mine and the light was mine, and every person I chose to photograph had agreed to be seen. I packed 2 duffel bags and a camera case, bought an Amtrak ticket on a Tuesday morning, and rode south into Penn Station. I had $2,400 in a checking account and the name of a photographer my thesis advisor had recommended. His name was James Harlow. I did not know yet what that introduction would become. I only knew that when the train pulled into the tunnel beneath the Hudson and the light outside the window went dark for a few seconds before the station lights came up, I felt something settle in my chest that had been unsteady for years. The city was about to see me. My mother's account had 847 posts by then. I had checked it one last time before I got on the train. I was not in any of them. Vivian graduated from law school the following May, on a Saturday, at a campus ceremony in New Haven. My mother called me in April to say I was welcome to attend if I wanted to. The phrasing was important. Not that I was expected, not that the family was planning on it, but that I was welcome to attend if I wanted to. I told her I would be there. I drove down from Providence in a rented car because I had already graduated and returned the RASD parking pass, and I arrived at the venue 40 minutes before the ceremony began. The family had reserved seats together near the center of the auditorium. My mother was already there when I arrived, wearing a pale linen blazer and the kind of composed expression she wore to events she had planned. My father stood beside her, his jacket slightly too warm for the weather. Vivian's boyfriend at the time, a second-year associate named Kevin, sat at the end of the row. I took a seat beside my father. He nodded when I sat down. My mother glanced over, said it was good I had made it, and then turned back toward the stage. The ceremony ran for 2 hours. Vivian walked across the stage, and the family stood when her name was called. I stood too. I had no reason not to. She had worked through 3 years of law school, woken up early, stayed late, done the reading. I was not competing with that. When she looked out toward our section after receiving her diploma, her face opened into a wide, unguarded smile. For a moment, she looked exactly like herself. Not a law school graduate, not the family's focal point, just Vivian at 26, genuinely happy. I applauded with everyone else. After the ceremony, the families gathered on the main lawn for photographs. It was a warm afternoon, very bright, the kind of light that flatters everyone. My mother had brought her phone and a small portable ring light she had started using for social media content. She set up the ring light on a compact stand, which told me the photos had been planned in advance, not an impulse. She positioned my father and Vivian in front of a stone arch at the edge of the quad. Then she stepped back, checked the frame on her phone, and adjusted Vivian's position slightly. Kevin took the phone and moved back to capture all 3 of them. I was standing 6 feet to the right of the arch, close enough to step in. No one asked me to step in. Kevin took several shots, my mother reviewed them, asked for one more with slightly different framing. The whole process took about 8 minutes. I watched it. I did not move. I did not ask to be included. because by that point I understood that asking would produce one of two outcomes. Either a reluctant adjustment where I was placed at the edge of the frame in a way that still communicated I did not belong there, or a polite explanation about the composition not working with a fourth person. Neither outcome was one I was willing to perform, so I stood where I was and waited. When Kevin handed the phone back to my mother, she looked at the shots with visible satisfaction. She showed one to Vivian, and Vivian nodded. Then she put the phone in her bag and looked around for a moment, as if checking whether anything had been left behind. Her eyes passed over me the way they would pass over a stranger standing nearby, registering presence but assigning no connection. She asked Kevin if he was joining us for dinner. He said he was. My mother looked at me then and said the reservation was for 4, but she could call and see about adding a 5th. The word 5th landed without emphasis, as if the numerical distinction were simply a logistical detail and not the most accurate description of my position in that family. I said I had to get back. I said it the way you say something when you have already made the decision before the moment arrived. She nodded and said to drive safely. My father said the same. Vivian hugged me briefly, her graduation gown still on, and said she would text me. I walked back across the lawn to the parking lot. On the drive back, I pulled over once, on a stretch of Route 15 near Milford, and sat in the car for about 10 minutes. Not crying, just sitting. There is a specific kind of tiredness that comes not from effort, but from having finally allowed yourself to understand something you already knew. I had been carrying a version of hope for years. Not the large, visible kind that you announce, the quiet kind, the kind that keeps you checking someone's Instagram feed after midnight to see if something has changed, if your face has appeared somewhere in their documentation of a life you share a last name with. That kind of hope weighs something. Sitting in that car on Route 15, I let it go. Not with drama, just by acknowledging it was there and then choosing not to carry it forward. My mother posted the photos from Vivian's graduation that same evening. 3 images. The first was the stone arch shot with all 3 of them, Vivian in the center, my parents on either side. The second was a close-up of Vivian holding her diploma. The third was a table shot at the dinner reservation. 4 people seated around white linens and lit candles, glasses raised. The caption read, "Couldn't be more proud. This family's heart is full." The post received over 600 likes by the following morning. The comment section was warm and generous. People wrote that Vivian looked radiant, that the family looked so close, that my mother must be bursting with pride. I read the comments at 7 in the morning, sitting on the floor of my campus apartment. I had not slept well. I looked at the photograph of the dinner table, counted the 4 glasses raised in the toast, and closed the app. That was the last time I attended a family event and expected anything from it. Within 3 weeks, I had packed, given notice to my subletter, and bought the Amtrak ticket. But before I left, I did one thing I had not planned. I set up my own camera on a tripod in the center of my apartment, the walls bare already from packing, my 2 duffel bags visible in the background against the door. I set the self-timer and sat in a chair facing the lens. I did not pose. I did not smile. I just looked directly at the camera and let the shutter fire. When I pulled the image up on the screen, it was the most clearly I had seen myself in years. No composition to manage, no one else to frame around, just my face, centered, in focus, taking up exactly the space I occupied. I saved it to a folder I titled Working. I did not post it anywhere. It was not for an audience. It was proof, the only kind I needed at that point, that I was present, that I had been present all along. I drove the rental car to the drop-off lot, took a cab to Providence Station, and got on the 7:14 southbound train with 2 bags and a camera case. $2,400. One name written on a Post-it note tucked inside the front pocket of my camera case. James Harlow. My thesis advisor had told me he was particular about who he worked with, that he did not take on assistants easily, and that I should not expect an immediate response to my email. She said to send the work anyway. She said someone like James would recognize the thesis project if he looked at it carefully. I had sent the email 3 days before packing. I had not heard back. I boarded the train and watched the Connecticut shoreline pass outside the window until it gave way to the industrial edge of New York, and then the tunnel, and then the fluorescent light of Penn Station. And I stepped onto the platform with everything I had and no guarantee of anything waiting. I did not know yet that James Harlow had replied to my email 4 hours before I got on the train. I had not checked my phone since the night before. The reply sat in my inbox, unread, as I dragged my duffel through the 8th Avenue exit and onto the sidewalk for the first time as a New York resident. The city was loud and overcast and completely indifferent to whether I was there or not. That indifference felt, for the first time in my life, like freedom. I found a coffee shop on West 34th Street, 2 blocks from the station exit, and sat down at a corner table with my camera case between my feet and both duffel bags pushed against the wall. I ordered a black coffee because it was the cheapest thing on the menu, and I was already calculating how long $2,400 would last in this city if I was not careful. The answer, based on what I knew about New York rents, even for the smallest shared rooms, was not long. I opened my email on my phone while the coffee cooled. James Harlow had replied at 3:17 in the afternoon the day before. The subject line of my original email had been Studio Assistant Inquiry, and his reply was 4 sentences. He said he had reviewed the portfolio link I sent. He said the thesis project was interesting, and that the technical approach in the series showed a specific kind of patience he did not often see in recent graduates. He said his current assistant was leaving at the end of the month, and he had 1 opening. He asked if I could come to the studio on Thursday at 10 in the morning. It was Tuesday. I had 2 days. I read the email 3 times. Not because the language was ambiguous, but because I needed the fact of it to become real before I allowed myself to respond. I wrote back in 2 sentences. I said Thursday at 10 worked, and I would be there. I pressed send, finished the coffee, and went to find somewhere to sleep. The room I rented for the first 6 weeks was in a shared apartment in Astoria, Queens, with 3 other people I found through a housing board. The room had a single window that faced the side of a brick building 4 feet away. I paid $850 for the first month in cash, which left me with $1,550 and no guarantee of income. I slept on an air mattress the first 2 nights because the bed frame had not arrived yet, and I lay there looking at the ceiling and listening to the elevated train pass every 12 minutes and thought about the house on Merritt Lane, with its flagstone path and its perfectly trimmed boxwood and its rooms that looked like photographs waiting to be taken. And I did not feel homesick. I felt the way I had felt stepping out of the Penn Station tunnel into the station light, like someone who had finally chosen their own frame. James Harlow's studio was in a building on West 28th Street in Chelsea, on the 4th floor above a lighting supply company. The elevator was slow and smelled faintly of developer fluid from a darkroom somewhere in the building. I arrived 11 minutes early and stood in the hallway reading the nameplate beside the door until exactly 2 minutes before 10, then knocked. A woman named Dana, who managed the studio's schedule and handled client communications, opened the door and led me into a reception area with 2 benches and a wall of framed prints. The prints were large, mostly black and white, and I recognized some of them from editorial spreads I had studied in school. James Harlow had been shooting for major publications and advertising campaigns for over 20 years. His work was technically precise and formally composed, but what set it apart was the quality of attention he brought to faces. His subjects always appeared to be genuinely present in the moment the shutter fired, not performing presence, but actually in it. That quality was difficult to manufacture. It meant he knew how to make people feel seen. James came out of a back room at 10 exactly. He was in his late 40s, lean, wearing a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He shook my hand without much ceremony and led me to a work table where he had pulled up a browser window showing my thesis project, cropped. He looked at the screen for a moment and then at me and asked how I had constructed the reconstructions, specifically whether the absent figures were composited from reference images or generated. I told him they were built from composite references, real shoulders and hands and shadows sourced from archival photography and rearranged to suggest rather than represent a specific person. He asked why I had chosen suggestion over representation. I said because the point was the space someone had occupied, not the person themselves. He nodded once and said that was a thoughtful answer and that most people would have gone for the more literal approach. Then he asked me to start Monday. The first 3 months were assistant work, which meant I carried equipment, prepped lighting rigs, organized the digital archive, and kept the studio calendar accurate. I did not shoot during those months, except on my own time. James did not ask me to, and I did not offer. I understood that the apprenticeship was about learning to see the way he worked before I contributed my own eye to anything. He was methodical and exact, and he corrected errors once, clearly, and did not repeat himself. If you made the same mistake twice, you were gone. I did not make the same mistake twice. In the 4th month, he handed me a second camera body on a shoot for a magazine editorial and told me to take frames from whatever angle I thought was being missed. I spent 40 minutes moving around the edges of what his lens was covering, looking for the moments that happened outside the main setup. When he reviewed my frames that evening, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said, I shot like someone who had spent a long time on the outside of things looking in. I said that was accurate. He did not ask me to explain. He printed 3 of my frames and pinned them to the review board beside his own. That was the moment the work shifted. By the end of that year, I was credited as a second photographer on 2 editorial commissions. James had also begun using me occasionally as a stand-in during lighting tests, positioning me in the frame to check ratios and shadow placement before the actual subject arrived. He was precise about light, and he needed a face that responded to adjustment without moving between changes. I was good at staying still. I had learned stillness early. During one of these tests, he asked me to look at a specific point on the back wall and hold. He checked the lighting, moved a reflector, checked again, and then stood behind the camera without firing the shutter. After a moment, he said he wanted to try something when the test was done. 3 days later, he brought me back into the studio alone. No editorial client, no shoot brief, just a white cyclorama backdrop, a single large softbox to the left, and a medium format camera on a tripod. He said he had been thinking about a personal project, a portrait series about women in transition, and he wanted to know if I would be willing to sit. Not as a model, as a subject. He said there was a difference. I asked him what the difference was. He said a model executes a brief. A subject brings something that cannot be directed. He had seen that quality in my face during the lighting tests, and he wanted to explore it. I said yes. We shot for 2 hours that afternoon. He gave almost no instruction. He occasionally moved the reflector or asked me to shift my chin a fraction. Mostly he just let the camera run. When he showed me the contact sheets the following week, I looked at my own face for a long time. Not with vanity, with the same analytical attention I gave to any subject in a frame. What I saw was a woman who had learned to hold something in without suppressing it entirely, so that it sat just beneath the surface, visible to anyone who knew how to look. James had known how to look. He included 4 of those portraits in a gallery submission the following spring. 2 were selected for a group show in Chelsea that ran for 6 weeks. On the closing night, a creative director from a luxury accessories brand called Meridian attended the show. Her name was Claire Alderton, and she was building the visual identity for the brand's national relaunch. She stood in front of one of my portraits for 11 minutes. Dana, who had come to the opening, timed it on her phone and told me afterward. Claire contacted James the following week. She was looking for a face for the campaign. She said she wanted someone who looked like they had survived something. Not in a damaged way, in the way of someone who had come through and was still standing and knew exactly where they were standing. She had found that face in the Chelsea group show. She wanted to know if the subject was available for a commercial shoot. James called me that Thursday evening. I was in the Astoria apartment, eating takeout at my desk and editing frames from an assignment. He told me what Claire had said and asked if I was interested. I put down my fork and looked at the brick wall visible through my window and thought about the Christmas card photograph with 3 people in front of a fireplace. I thought about 847 posts and none of them containing my face. I thought about standing 6 feet from a stone arch in New Haven while my mother checked the framing on her phone. Then I thought about a 48-foot billboard in Times Square. I told James I was interested. The Meridian shoot took place over 4 days in October in a studio in the meatpacking district. Claire wanted stark, close, direct, nothing performative. The campaign concept was called Presence, which was either a coincidence or the most precise description of what that shoot meant to me, and I have never fully decided which. When the final images came back from post-production in late November, Claire called James and said they were going with the billboard placement in Times Square as the campaign's opening move. The image selected was a close crop, my face at a slight angle, eyes forward, the background pure black. The billboard would run for 12 weeks beginning in January, 48 feet wide, the corner of Broadway and 46th Street. I did not tell my family. There was no particular decision involved in that. I simply had no version of the conversation that made sense to have. My mother had 847 posts on her Instagram, and I was in none of them. Whatever I had built in New York, I had built without their knowledge, and that felt appropriate. The work did not need their awareness to be real. The billboard went up on a Thursday morning in January. I walked past it before my first coffee, looked at it for 30 seconds from the sidewalk across the street, and then went to the studio. It was a face I recognized. It was, for the first time, exactly where it was supposed to be. What happened next, I did not plan and could not have predicted. The billboard launched on a Thursday, and by Friday afternoon, Claire Alderton had sent James a text with a single screenshot attached. It showed the Meridian Instagram account, which the brand had relaunched alongside the campaign, and the engagement numbers after the first 24 hours. The post featuring the billboard image had reached 1.4 million accounts. Claire's text said simply, "She landed." James forwarded it to me without comment. By the end of the second day, the number was 2.3 million impressions. The Meridian campaign had been designed as a relaunch, and Claire had structured the rollout so that the Times Square placement was the first public-facing piece, meant to generate awareness before the editorial and digital content followed. The strategy worked. Fashion and lifestyle media began picking up the image within 48 hours. A photograph of the billboard appeared in 3 separate street-style accounts with large followings, each one noting the starkness of the composition, the directness of the face, the way the black background made the image feel more like a painting than an advertisement. One account, with just under 200,000 followers, posted it with the caption, "Whoever this is, she's not selling you the bag. She's telling you it already belongs to her." I read that caption in a coffee shop in Chelsea on a Saturday morning and sat with it for a while. I had never thought about my own face as a tool of communication. For most of my life, my face had been the thing my mother chose not to include. Now, it was on a corner of Broadway and 46th Street in a frame 48 feet wide, and strangers were writing about it with genuine feeling. I did not know what to do with that information. I ordered a second coffee and went back to the studio. Claire called on the following Monday to discuss extending the campaign. She wanted to add a second placement in the meatpacking district and a third in Soho. She also mentioned that 2 editorial clients had contacted Meridian asking for the photographer's name after seeing the billboard. She meant James. He handled those inquiries and did not share the details with me unless they became relevant to my work. What he did share that same week was that he was submitting a portfolio to the Whitmore Gallery in Chelsea for a retrospective consideration. The Whitmore was one of the oldest working galleries in the city, with a program that concentrated on portrait photography. James had shown there twice before, in group exhibitions. This would be his first solo retrospective if accepted. He said he was planning to include recent work, meaning the series he had shot of me over the past year. He asked if I had any objection to the portraits being submitted. I said I did not. I did not tell him what happened on the third Friday of January. Vivian was in Manhattan for a deposition. She worked at a firm in Midtown that handled corporate litigation, and she came into the city 2 or 3 times a month, depending on her caseload. That Friday, her deposition ended early, around 3 in the afternoon, and she decided to walk from her client's building on 6th Avenue toward the Times Square area before catching her train back to Connecticut. She had done this before. She liked the energy of that part of the city, and occasionally stopped to look at the large-format advertising installations. She had told me this herself in the past, during one of the occasional phone calls that still happened between us, the brief and carefully neutral ones, where we asked about each other's work and confirmed we were both still alive and functional and did not go further than that. She walked up Broadway and turned onto 46th Street and looked up. I know all of this because she posted about it. She stopped in front of the Meridian billboard, looked at it for a moment, and then turned so the billboard was over her left shoulder and took a photograph with her phone. The image showed her in a burgundy coat, her hair pulled back, the billboard visible behind and above her, my face 48 feet wide and in perfect focus in the background. She captioned it, "Obsessed with this campaign. This model's face is everything. Heart eyes emoji. #Meridian, #NYC. She tagged the Meridian account. She posted it at 3:47 in the afternoon. My mother liked it at 3:51. I found out that evening. Casey, my roommate from RISD, who still followed both me and Vivian on Instagram from our college years, sent me a screenshot with a short message. She wrote that she thought I should see this. The screenshot showed Vivian's post, the image, the caption, the like count, which had already reached 63. I could see my mother's username in the list of people who had liked it. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood at the window of my apartment for several minutes. The elevated train passed. The brick wall across the way was in shadow. I tried to locate exactly what I was feeling and found that it was not the thing I might have expected. It was not satisfaction. It was not the clean, bright feeling of a point being proven. What I felt was closer to a very old tiredness finally being confirmed. Something I had understood for years, but had never seen documented so plainly. My mother had a face in her Instagram feed, a face she had actively chosen to engage with, pressed a small heart beneath, indicated approval of, and she did not know it was mine. She had spent 22 years editing my face out of every frame she controlled, and here she was, in under 4 minutes, approving of that same face the moment it arrived without a name attached. She did not recognize me. I want to be precise about what that meant, because there are 2 ways to read it, and only one of them is accurate. The first reading is that my mother failed to notice a resemblance, which might suggest nothing more than that a billboard is not a family photograph, and the conditions of recognition are different. The second reading is that my mother had spent so long choosing not to see me that she had lost the ability to see me even when I was directly in front of her, scaled to 48 feet, in a frame she had no control over. I do not think the first reading holds. I had not changed significantly since the last time she saw me. The billboard image was a close crop, lit precisely to feature the structure of my face. Anyone who had known my face for 27 years and was paying attention would have recognized it. She was not paying attention. She had not been paying attention for a very long time. I picked up my phone and opened the post again. Vivian's comments section was small, mostly friends from law school, and colleagues who wrote things like, "Stunning campaign," and "You look amazing in this coat." My mother had not commented, only liked. Vivian had replied to 2 comments, and then the thread went quiet. I scrolled past the post, put the phone back down, and went to bed. I did not comment. I did not reach out to Vivian. I did not call my mother. I did not post anything myself. There was nothing to say that the situation had not already said more precisely than I could have. The following morning I told James. Not the full history, the Christmas cards and the Instagram account and the count of 847 posts. I told him the relevant part, which was that my sister had posted a selfie with the billboard and my mother had liked it without recognizing me. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said that was either a very painful thing or a very freeing one, and asked which it felt like. I thought about it. I said it felt like confirmation of something I had already known, which made it less of a wound and more of a record. He nodded and said that was a mature way to carry it. Then he went back to reviewing the prints he had been working on. He paused at one, a print from the very first session we had shot together in the studio, the one where he had asked me to look at the back wall and hold. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said the Whitmore had come back with a response. The retrospective had been accepted. The opening was scheduled for the following October, 30 years after his first published portrait. He said he planned to include 12 images from our series, and that one of them, the one currently in his hand, would be the centerpiece. 6 feet tall, the main wall of the primary gallery space. He said he thought I should know before the announcement went out. I said thank you. He said there was nothing to thank him for, that the image did the work itself. What I did not know at that point was that the gallery opening would not stay a quiet professional milestone. It would become the moment I had been building toward, not because I planned it that way, but because the people who had spent the longest time not seeing me would walk through a gallery door and finally be required to see me, and I would be standing 30 feet away when they did. That moment was coming. But before it arrived, there was one more piece James needed to put in place, and it arrived in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 11 months before the opening, in the form of an invitation I had not asked for and did not expect. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in March as a PDF attachment from the Whitmore Gallery's administrative address. The subject line read, Harlow Retrospective, Subject Documentation and Opening Night Guest List. I opened it on my laptop in the studio's back office, where I had been organizing the digital archive from a recent editorial shoot. The PDF was a formal document, 4 pages, outlining the exhibition structure, the timeline for print production, and the process for finalizing wall text and program notes. My name appeared on the first page under the heading Primary Exhibition Subject. Nora Ashfield, photographer and model, series contributor, 2022 to present. It was the first time I had seen my name in a printed document from an institution that had nothing to do with a class roster or a lease agreement. I read it twice, slowly, and then closed the laptop and went to make coffee. James came in 20 minutes later with a folder of prints under his arm. He set them on the table and asked if I had seen the Whitmore document. I said I had. He said the gallery director, a woman named Patricia Osei, who had run the Whitmore for 11 years and had a reputation for precise, unhurried curation, wanted a brief statement from the primary subject for the program notes. Not a biography, not an artist statement in the formal sense, something personal, maybe 200 words, about what it felt like to be on the other side of the lens. He said it was optional and he would not push it if I was not comfortable. I said I would write it. It took me 3 drafts over 2 weeks. The first was too explanatory, filling in context that the audience did not need, and that diluted the point. The second was too spare, only 4 sentences that said nothing of value. The third draft was the one I sent to Patricia. It was 187 words. I wrote about the experience of being a subject rather than a photographer, about the difference between holding a frame and being held by one, about what it means to be seen by someone whose intention is to record rather than to manage. I did not mention my family. I did not mention Greenwich. But anyone who knew the full story would have recognized what the words were circling around. Patricia replied within a day. She said the statement was exactly what the program needed and that she would include it without editing. In April, the gallery released the press materials for the retrospective. The release went out to a list of editorial contacts in the art and photography press, a standard procedure for a Whitmore opening. It included a brief description of the exhibition, James's credentials, and a paragraph about the Centerpiece series, which the gallery titled Presence, the same word Claire Alderton had used for the Meridian campaign, though neither James nor Patricia had known about that when they chose it. The press materials named me. They described the series as a collaboration between the photographer and a New York-based visual artist who had served as both assistant and primary subject over 3 years. They included one preview image from the series, not the centerpiece, a smaller portrait from the second session we had shot, my face in 3/4 profile against a white wall. The preview image was published on the Whitmore's Instagram account on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday, it had been shared by 2 photography publications and 1 general culture account with a significant following. The caption on the Whitmore's post named James as the artist and me as the subject. It used my full name. I was in a coffee shop in the West Village on Thursday afternoon when my phone showed a notification from a number I had not heard from in 4 months. It was Vivian. The message said only, "Hey, is this you?" Attached was a screenshot of the Whitmore's Instagram post. My name was visible in the caption beneath the portrait. She had circled it in the screenshot with a red markup tool. I looked at the message for a moment, then I typed, "Yes." She replied within 2 minutes. She said she had no idea I was doing this, that she had not known I was working in photography professionally, that she had seen the Whitmore post through a friend who followed the gallery account. She asked how long this had been going on. I told her I had been in New York for 3 years and had been working with James Harlow since shortly after I arrived. There was a pause of several minutes before her next message. She said Mom was going to see this. I said I expected she would. Vivian wrote back that she thought the portrait was beautiful and that she meant that. I said thank you. The conversation ended there. My mother called on Saturday morning at 9:45. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was careful and measured. She said she had seen something about a gallery exhibition and wanted to understand what I was doing. She said she was glad to hear I had found work I cared about and that she hoped things were going well for me in the city. She said she would love to hear more about it when I had time to talk. There was a pause at the end, a brief, unscripted moment before she said goodbye, where I could hear the faint sound of her composing herself. She did not mention the billboard. She did not mention Vivian's selfie from January. She did not mention the 847 posts. She said it in the tone she used when she was gathering information before making a decision. I did not call her back that day, or the day after. I thought carefully about what I wanted from the interaction before I responded at all. The following week, I called her on a Tuesday evening. The conversation lasted 14 minutes. She asked questions about my work, and I answered them with the same neutral efficiency she had used in her voicemail. She asked about the exhibition, and I told her it was a retrospective opening in October at the Whitmore Gallery in Chelsea, that it covered 30 years of James's work and included a recent series he had shot over the past 3 years. She asked if the portrait in the press materials was the kind of work featured throughout the series. I said it was representative. She said it was striking work. I said I would pass that along to James. Near the end of the call, she asked if the opening was open to the public or by invitation. I told her the opening night was invitation only, that the gallery would be managing a guest list, and that the exhibition itself ran for 6 weeks after the opening and was free to the public during gallery hours. There was a pause. She said she might try to attend the public exhibition. I said that was fine. Then the call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after. I thought about whether to send her an invitation to the opening. Patricia had given me a small allocation of guest tickets, 6 in total, which I had not yet assigned. James had suggested I consider who I wanted in the room that evening, people who had been part of the journey in some way. Casey was on my list, my thesis advisor from RISD, a photographer I had met through James who had become a genuine friend. That was 3. 3 tickets remained. I thought about what it would mean to have my mother walk into the Whitmore Gallery on opening night, past the smaller portraits in the outer rooms, and into the main hall where the 6-foot centerpiece hung on the primary wall. I thought about what she would see and when she would understand what she was looking at. I thought about whether I wanted to be present for that moment, or whether I had already moved far enough past it that the outcome no longer carried the weight it once had. I had not moved past it. Not entirely. And that honesty, the admission that some part of me still wanted to be seen by the people who had spent the longest time refusing to see me, was not weakness. It was just true. I sent my mother an invitation that Thursday. 1 ticket. I included a brief note that said the exhibition opened on October 14th and that I hoped she could attend. I did not explain anything further. I did not prepare her for what she would find. I sent it, closed my email, and went back to work. James asked me the following week whether I had finalized my guest list. I told him I had sent one to my mother. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he went back to the prints he was reviewing and said only that he hoped the evening would go the way I needed it to. I did not tell him what I needed it to go. I was not sure I knew yet. What I did know was that October was 6 months away and there was still work to do, and the work was the thing I could control, and so that was where I put my attention. The remaining months passed the way preparation always does when something significant is approaching, steadily, with a surface of routine covering the pressure underneath. The Whitmore Gallery on West 26th Street had 3 connected rooms. The first was the entry hall, where smaller works from the early part of James's career hung in 2 rows at eye level, black and white portraits from his editorial years, faces that had appeared in newspapers and magazines over 3 decades. The second room held the middle period work, color prints from commissioned projects, the years when he had moved between advertising and fine art without fully committing to either. The third room was the main hall. It was larger than the first 2 combined, with ceilings that ran 18 feet, white walls, and a lighting rig designed specifically to direct warm, focused beams at each print. At the far end of the main hall, centered on the longest wall, was the piece Patricia had designated as the anchor of the entire exhibition. 6 feet tall, mounted without a frame because James felt the frame created a boundary the image did not need. A single, warm light source from the upper left, falling across the image in a way that highlighted the left cheekbone and cast the jaw in shadow. My face, at 25, looking directly at whoever was standing in front of it. I arrived at 6:30, half an hour before doors opened, to walk through the rooms one final time with James and Patricia. The catering staff was finishing the champagne setup along the entry wall. A photographer hired by the gallery was testing his light near the main hall entrance. Patricia walked us through the placement of each piece, speaking about the sequence of rooms as a kind of narrative, a viewer moving from documentary to personal, from the world James had observed to the one he had entered into through collaboration. When we reached the main hall, she stopped and looked at the centerpiece for a moment without speaking. Then she said it was the strongest portrait she had hung in 11 years. James thanked her. She looked at me and said she meant the subject as much as the photographer. Doors opened at 7. The first 100 guests arrived in the initial 20 minutes. By 7:45, the entry hall was full, and the crowd had moved through into the second and third rooms. I had positioned myself near the far wall of the second room, beside a smaller portrait from our first session, the one where James had asked me to look at the back wall and hold. From that position, I could see the entrance to the main hall on my left and the entry hall door on my right. I was not hiding. I was watching. Casey arrived at 7:15 in a dark green dress, her pentax hanging from one shoulder out of habit. She hugged me and then stepped back and looked around the room and said she had no words. My thesis advisor, Professor Lynn, arrived shortly after with her husband. She walked through the second room slowly, pausing at each print, and when she reached the smaller portrait beside me, she put her hand briefly on my arm and said the work had gone exactly where it needed to go. A photographer named Derek, who I had met through James 2 years earlier and who had become one of the steadiest people in my New York life, arrived at 7:30 with 2 glasses of champagne, handed me one, and stood beside me without requiring conversation. These were the people I had built something with, not by inheritance, by choice, and by time. James circulated through the rooms with the ease of someone who had done this before, which he had, but also with a visible warmth that the evening seemed to draw out of him. He introduced guests to each other, answered questions about specific pieces, paused at the centerpiece long enough to let people ask about the subject. I watched him from across the main hall at one point and thought about the studio on West 28th Street and the morning he had handed me a camera body and told me to shoot what was being missed. 3 years had covered a great deal of distance. My mother arrived at 8:12. She came through the entry hall door in a navy wrap dress, composed in the way she was always composed in public, posture exact, expression neutral and pleasant. My father was directly behind her in a dark jacket. Vivian followed, in heels, scanning the room the way she scanned every room, quickly and with professional thoroughness, the same habit she used in courtrooms to read a space before committing to a position. My mother had called the gallery 2 weeks earlier and asked whether the invitation allowed additional guests. Patricia's assistant had told her that each invitation permitted 2. She had brought both of them. I saw them from the second room. I did not move. They spent time in the entry hall, my mother pausing at the earlier work, the editorial portraits from James's documentary years. She looked at them with genuine attention, her head tilting slightly at each one, the way it did when she was assessing something for aesthetic value. My father stood beside her. Vivian drifted toward the far wall and looked at a portrait of an older man in a workroom, one of James's earliest published pieces. She leaned forward slightly to read the wall label. They moved into the second room after about 10 minutes. My mother's eyes went to the prints along the right wall first, the color work, then traveled left. She passed within 12 feet of where I was standing. She did not see me. The room was full, the lighting was warm and not particularly bright, and she was focused on the prints. I watched her look at the smaller portrait of me, beside which I had been standing for 40 minutes. She stood in front of it for a moment. I could see her face from the side. Nothing changed in her expression. She moved on. They crossed into the main hall. I followed at a distance, close enough to see them clearly, far enough that I was simply another guest moving through a crowded space. The main hall was the fullest room of the 3. Voices overlapped, champagne glasses caught the overhead light, and the conversation had the warm, slightly elevated pitch of a room full of people who were genuinely engaged. And at the far end of all of it, on the longest wall, under the focused beam from the upper left, the 6-foot portrait waited. My mother walked toward it. She passed the closer prints without slowing. Her attention had been caught by the scale of the centerpiece from the moment she entered the hall. The size of it drew the eye immediately and held it. She walked until she was about 8 feet from the surface and then stopped. My father came up beside her. Vivian stopped slightly behind them both. My mother looked at the portrait. She looked at it the way she looked at a room she was designing, with the analytical attention she brought to any composition she was trying to understand. She read the light. She took in the framing, the way the face filled the space without crowding it, the precise positioning of the shaw on the jaw. And then something shifted. I watched it happen from 30 feet away. Her posture changed first, the held quality in her shoulders releasing slightly. Then her head moved a fraction, a small tilt, the kind of adjustment the eyes make when recognition is arriving and the brain is still processing whether to trust it. She reached for my father's arm. Not dramatically, not with a sound or a sudden motion. Her right hand moved sideways and found his forearm and gripped it. He looked at her. She did not look back at him. She was still looking at the portrait. He looked at the portrait. He looked at her again. Then he covered her hand with his, and they both stood there, and neither of them spoke. And across the main hall of the Whitmore Gallery on the 14th of October, I watched my mother finally see my face. Vivian was the one who turned around. She turned slowly, scanning the room the way she had scanned the entry hall, and her eyes moved from face to face until they found me near the back wall. She stopped. We looked at each other across 20 feet of crowded gallery space. I did not smile. I did not move. I just looked back at her with the same calm attention I had learned to hold during the studio sessions when James needed me to stay still and let the frame do its work. Patricia O'Say stepped to the center of the main hall at that moment, a glass raised slightly, and the room began to quiet for the remarks she had been scheduled to give at 8:30. I heard my name before I had taken a single step toward my family or away from them. Patricia Osei did not use a microphone. She had a voice that carried without assistance, clear and unhurried, the voice of someone who had spent years speaking in rooms where attention needed to be held rather than demanded. The crowd in the main hall settled within a few seconds of her raising her glass. 300 people arranged themselves loosely across the space, faces turning toward her, conversations trailing off mid-sentence. She began with James. She spoke about 30 years as a framework, not a milestone, and about what it means to spend 3 decades looking at people's faces with genuine curiosity rather than expedience. She named specific bodies of work from his career: the conflict documentary portraits from the 90s, the decade of editorial work that had made his name recognizable in the industry, the mid-career commercial period that he had always been ambivalent about, but which had funded the freedom he later found. She spoke about the Whitmore's history with his work, the 2 group exhibitions, the ongoing conversation she had been having with him for nearly a decade about what a solo retrospective would look like when the time came. She said the time had come because the work had demanded it. Then she turned to the main series. She said the 12 portraits along the walls of the main hall represented something she rarely encountered in portrait photography: a consistent collaboration sustained over 3 years in which the subject had not merely agreed to be photographed, but had actively shaped the conditions of her own visibility. She said the series was called Presence and that the title was not decorative. She said the central question of the series was what it looks like when someone chooses to be fully seen, not for the first time, but after a long period of being made invisible. She said it was the most emotionally coherent body of work she had reviewed in her 11 years at the Whitmore, and that the coherence came not only from the photographer, but from the subject herself. She said, the subject of these 12 portraits is Nora Ashfield, who is here with us tonight. The room turned. Not all at once, not in a dramatic single motion, but in that wave-like way that a crowd turns when a name is spoken and people begin looking for the face attached to it. I was standing near the back wall, a champagne glass in my hand that I had not been drinking from, and I felt the turning of the room as a kind of pressure, not unpleasant, more like the feeling of a window opening. Patricia raised her glass toward the back of the hall, and the guests nearest her began to applaud, and the applause moved through the room in the same wave the turning had, until the main hall of the Whitmore Gallery was full of 300 people, looking at me and clapping. I did not move for a moment. I let the sound settle around me the way you let a new environment settle when you first walk into it, registering the temperature and the quality of the light before you decide what to do next. Then I raised my glass slightly in acknowledgement and nodded once, the way James had taught me to receive professional recognition without performing either false modesty or inflated gratitude. Just a clean acknowledgement that said, I hear you and I am here. Across the main hall, past the crowd, I could see my mother's face. She was still standing near the centerpiece. She had not moved from the position she had taken when she reached for my father's arm. The applause was happening around her, and she was not part of it. Her hands were at her sides. She was looking at me from across the room with an expression I had not seen on her face before, and I had been reading her face since I was old enough to understand that it contained information she would not otherwise offer. What I saw was not shame, exactly. It was closer to the look of someone who has opened a door expecting one room and found an entirely different building on the other side. The architecture of what she thought she knew had just been revised without her permission. My father stood beside her with his hands in his pockets. He was looking at me too. He had the same expression he wore when he attended my RISD graduation and shook my hand and said the work looked professional, careful, and composed, and slightly remote, as if he were observing something that required a response he had not yet found the correct words for. Vivian was not beside them. She had moved closer to the center of the hall during the remarks and was now standing about 15 feet from me. And when the applause subsided and the room broke back into conversation, she walked the remaining distance and stopped in front of me. She said, I didn't know. I said, I know. She looked around the room, at the portraits on the walls, at the centerpiece behind us that was still drawing most of the hall's attention. She said she had been trying to understand, on the drive down from Connecticut, what exactly she was coming to see. She had known from my email that I was connected to the exhibition somehow. She had not known the extent of it. She said standing in the main hall and watching 300 people applaud my name in a space I had built something in that she had not been aware of was the most disorienting experience she could remember. She said it in a way that was not performance. It was just honesty, careful and a little late. I told her I was glad she had come. I meant it, not fully, and not without the weight of everything that had preceded it, but in the specific and limited way that you can mean something true without meaning everything around it. My mother crossed the room 4 minutes later. My father came with her a step behind and stopped at a slight distance when she reached me, giving her the space to lead whatever was about to happen. She looked at me for a moment before she spoke. In 27 years, I had never seen my mother at a loss for the opening line of a conversation. She was a woman who managed every room she entered, who positioned people and light and language with the same deliberate attention she brought to interior design. Standing in front of me in the main hall of the Whitmore, she did not have an opening line. She had a face that had run out of its usual architecture. She said, "Nora." Just that, my name. The way you say something when you have a great deal more to say and none of it is ready. I said, "Hello, Mom." She looked at the centerpiece behind me, 6 feet of my face under a precise, warm light. Then she looked back at me and said she had not realized, that she had not understood the scale of what I had built here, and she wanted me to know that she was proud. The word proud arrived in the sentence at the wrong weight. It was the word she would have used correctly if I had graduated from a program she had approved of or been promoted at a company she had recommended. It did not fit this room or this moment, and she seemed to hear it land incorrectly even as she said it. I said, "You liked it in January." She looked at me without comprehension. I said the billboard, Meridian, Broadway and 46th Street. She had liked Vivian's post within 4 minutes. My face, 48 feet wide. She had put a small heart beneath it and moved on with her morning. The color in her face shifted. My father, standing a step behind her, looked at the floor. Vivian, who was close enough to hear, went very still. My mother said she had not known. I told her I understood that. I said I was not presenting it as an accusation, only as a fact that seemed relevant to where we were standing. She had spent many years deciding my face did not belong in the record she was building of our family. The record she had built without me was sitting on her phone right now. 847 posts, and none of them contained me. But here, in a room she had no control over, managed by a woman who had spent 11 years curating work on its own terms, my face was the largest thing in the space, and it had earned its place by being exactly what it was. I said, "You were right that I didn't fit your composition. I just found one that fit me." She did not respond immediately. She looked at me with that same revised architecture expression, the one that told me the building she had been standing in had more floors than she had accounted for. My father put his hand briefly on her shoulder. She did not move. Patricia appeared at my elbow at that moment, unhurried and precise as always, and said there was someone she wanted to introduce me to before the evening ended, a collector who had been speaking with her for the past 20 minutes about the centerpiece. She said the conversation had gone well, and she thought I should hear the offer directly. I excused myself from my family with a brief nod and followed Patricia across the hall. The offer for the centerpiece was $410,000. The collector, a woman named Sandra Bright, who ran an art foundation in Tribeca, said she had been standing in front of it for 40 minutes and that the image did something she had not experienced in a gallery in several years. She said it felt like being seen by someone who had already survived something. She asked if I was comfortable with a private sale, that the piece would be held in the foundation's collection and loaned for institutional exhibitions, rather than kept behind closed doors. I told her that mattered to me. She said she thought it would. Behind me, across the full length of the main hall, my mother was still standing in the same spot. My father was beside her. Vivian had moved to stand with them. The three of them were looking at the centerpiece, at the 6-foot portrait of the daughter and sister they had spent 22 years editing out of their record. And I watched them from the far end of the hall as Sandra Bright and Patricia finalized the language of the arrangement between them, and the room continued its warm and steady conversation around us all. I did not go back to them that night. I stayed for another hour, talking with Patricia, with James, with Casey, with Professor Lynn, with Derek, with Sandra Bright, with a dozen strangers who had questions about the work or about the experience of being a subject rather than a photographer. I did all of this with genuine attention and genuine presence because that was the only way I knew how to be in a room anymore, fully in it or not at all. At 10:15, I said goodnight to James near the entry hall. He shook my hand and held it for a moment longer than a handshake required, and said the evening had been exactly what he had hoped. I believed him. My family had left by then. I had not seen them go. The week after the opening, I woke up each morning in my Astoria apartment and went through the same routine I had built over 3 years in New York. Coffee, the window with the brick wall, the elevated train at its 12-minute intervals, the studio by 9. I did not feel triumphant, which surprised me a little when I noticed it. What I felt was quieter than that, a kind of settled weight, the way a long-held question feels when it has finally been answered, and the answer turns out to be both less dramatic and more true than you had imagined. The evening at the Whitmore had not changed what I had built. It had simply made it visible to people who had not been paying attention. The building had always been there. The exhibition ran for 6 weeks. Sandra Bright's foundation collected the centerpiece on the final day of the show, and James and I stood in the now empty main hall while the handlers wrapped it for transport. He looked at the blank wall where it had hung for 6 weeks and said it had been the right time and the right piece. I told him the foundation planned to loan it to the Portland Museum of Art for a group exhibition on contemporary portraiture the following spring. He said that was good. He said the image deserved to keep traveling. I agreed. During the exhibition's public run, 7 different editorial outlets published coverage of the retrospective. 3 of them named me specifically in the body of the piece, not in passing, but as a central figure in James's recent work. 2 included photographs from the series. 1 ran a brief profile alongside the review, 400 words about my background, my thesis project at RISD, the Meridian campaign, my 3 years in New York. It was the first time my name had appeared in print in connection with my own work rather than James's. My thesis advisor sent me the link with a message that said simply, "There it is." 3 weeks after the opening, a letter arrived at the studio addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. Dana set it on my work table without comment. I did not open it immediately. I left it there for 2 days while I finished an editorial assignment, going about my work around it the way you go about your day around something you know you will have to address and are not yet ready to. On the 3rd evening, after the studio had emptied, I opened it. It was 2 pages, handwritten on the cream paper she used for formal correspondence. She had taken her time with it. The handwriting was careful, each line level, none of the rushed quality that appears when someone is writing quickly to release feeling rather than to communicate. She wrote that she had spent 3 weeks trying to find the right words and was not certain she had found them. She acknowledged specific things: the Christmas card shoots, the Instagram account, the graduation photographs in New Haven, the phone call after Vivian's law school graduation where she had asked about the reservation for 4 and used the word 5th. She did not explain or justify any of them. She named them and said they had been wrong. She said she understood if I did not want to respond and that she was writing because she needed me to know she understood what she had done, not because she expected anything from that understanding. At the end of the 2nd page, she wrote one more thing. She said she had gone back through her Instagram account after the opening and looked at every post she had ever made. She said she had counted, She did not tell me the number. She just said she had counted, and that she sat with it for a long time, and that she had no adequate response to what the count represented, except the admission that she had done it, and that it had been deliberate, and that deliberateness was what she could not excuse. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it and put it in the top drawer of my work table. I did not respond immediately. I sat with the letter the way she had said she sat with the count, giving it the weight it required without rushing toward a decision. What I felt reading it was not the resolution of old pain, which is the version of this moment that stories tend to promise. The pain was still there, quieter now, but specific, still attached to specific dates and specific rooms and a specific number of posts. What changed when I read the letter was the feeling that I was no longer required to carry the question of whether she knew. She knew. She had always known. And now she had said so, in her own handwriting, on the cream paper she used when she wanted something to be permanent. I replied 3 weeks later with a single page. I told her I had received the letter, and I appreciated the honesty it had taken to write it. I told her I was not in a position to rebuild what had been constructed and then systematically taken apart over 22 years, and that I did not think either of us would benefit from pretending otherwise. I said I was open to a relationship defined by what we could honestly offer each other in the present, which was not nothing, but was also not the full access of a family that had maintained its structure. I told her the boundaries I was setting were not about punishment. They were about what I could sustain. I signed it with my name. She replied 2 weeks after that with 4 sentences. She said she understood and respected what I had written. She said she hoped I was well. She said she was glad the work had found the audience it deserved. She did not argue with the terms I had set. That restraint, coming from a woman who had spent decades managing every composition she entered, was the most honest thing she had ever offered me. My father called in December, 4 months after the opening. The call lasted 9 minutes. He asked how I was doing. I said I was well. He asked about the work. I told him about a commission I was finishing, a portrait series for a nonprofit working with women in transition housing in the Bronx. He said that sounded meaningful. I said it was. Then neither of us spoke for a moment, and he said he was sorry. Not about anything specific, just the word itself, offered plainly, without ornamentation. I said I heard him. That was the whole conversation. When I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand and thought about a man who had stood at every event of my life at a slight remove, always a step behind my mother, always covering her hand with his when she reached out. And I felt something toward him that was not forgiveness exactly, but was the thing that lives close to forgiveness, an acknowledgement that people contain their failures and their capacity for better in the same body, and that sometimes the better arrives late and partial and is still worth receiving. Vivian texted me in November asking if I wanted to meet for coffee the next time she was in the city. I said yes. We met on a Thursday afternoon at a coffee shop in the West Village, not far from where I had been living since I moved out of the Astoria apartment in the spring. We sat for 2 hours. We talked about her work, about my work, about the small and daily texture of our lives, the kinds of things that siblings who have maintained contact talk about without effort. There was still distance between us, real distance, built from years of proximity without solidarity. We did not pretend otherwise. But there was also something genuine in the room, a willingness to be present with each other that had not always been there, and I held on to that willingness carefully, the way you hold something you are not sure yet will last. In February of the following year, I noticed something on my mother's Instagram account. I did not check it often, not with the late-night frequency of those college years, when I had been looking for evidence of a change that never came. I looked occasionally, the way you check a weather forecast for a place you no longer live, out of habit more than need. In February, she posted a photograph from what appeared to be a dinner at a restaurant in Greenwich. The image showed a table set for several people. My father was visible on the left, Vivian was in the center, and at the right edge of the frame, slightly turned, mid-conversation with someone out of the shot, was a woman in a dark blue top with short hair and the specific posture I had developed in years of standing behind a camera. The image was not cropped at the right edge. I was in it. My mother had posted a photograph that included me and had not removed me from the frame. She did not caption it with my name. She did not draw attention to it. The caption mentioned the restaurant and the occasion, a birthday dinner for Vivian, and named Vivian and my father. My name was not there. But my face was. 847 posts had become 848, and in the 848th, I existed in the frame without being the subject of it, which was actually the most ordinary thing in the world. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I put my phone down and went back to the print I had been working on. I moved into a studio apartment in Brooklyn Heights in April, with high ceilings and a north-facing window that gave clean, even light through the whole morning. I set up a small darkroom in the bathroom, using a second-hand enlarger Casey found for me on a photography equipment forum. On Sunday mornings, I develop prints from the week's shooting, standing in the red-lit quiet of that narrow room, watching images emerge in the developer tray, the way I had watched them emerge in the RISD darkroom 7 years earlier, with the same patience I had learned then and have never stopped needing. I make coffee afterward and carry it to the window seat and watch the light move across the rooftops of the neighborhood and think about what I am going to photograph that day. James and I still work together. The editorial commissions come in steadily now, split between his name and mine, which happened gradually and without a formal conversation, the way professional evolution tends to happen when the work is the thing both people are actually focused on. Dana still manages the studio calendar. Derek still appears with coffee or champagne, depending on the occasion. Casey is in Brooklyn too, 3 neighborhoods away, and we walk the park on Sunday afternoons when our schedules align, and she still carries the Pentax out of habit, and so do I. I think sometimes about the self-portrait I took in the Providence apartment on the morning I left, the one I titled Working, the one I never posted. My face in a chair against a bare wall, 2 duffel bags visible at the door, the shutter firing on a timer with no one else in the room. I printed it last year on 8x10 fiber paper, and it sits on the shelf above my work table in the darkroom, not framed, just resting against the wall where I can see it when I am working. It is the most accurate document of where I came from. A woman in a room she was about to leave, looking directly at a camera no one else was holding, taking up exactly the space she occupied. Not for anyone else's composition, not to fit an aesthetic someone else had defined, just because she was present and had decided that being present was worth recording. I did not do this for my mother. I did not do it to prove something to the family that cropped me from 847 versions of itself. I did it because one afternoon in a small studio on West 28th Street, a photographer asked me to look at the back wall and hold still, and I did, and what came back in the frame was evidence that I had been worth looking at the entire time. The people who could not see that were not wrong about who I was. They were just looking at the wrong composition. I stopped waiting for them to pick up the right camera a long time ago. I had my own. The complete 11-part script is now finished. Thank you for following this story all the way through. If it moved you in any way, if you recognized any part of it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Nora's story is not really about a billboard or a gallery or a portrait that sold for $410,000. It is about something smaller and more permanent than any of those things. It is about what happens when you stop waiting for the people who are supposed to see you to finally look up, and you start building something in the light you find for yourself. For 22 years, her mother held a camera and made a choice, over and over, to crop Nora out of the frame. That choice was not accidental. It was deliberate, repeated, and documented in 847 posts that told the world a version of a family that left one of its members entirely out of the record. And yet the face that was removed from every holiday card, every dinner table photograph, every careful composition on Merritt Lane became the face that filled a 48-foot billboard in Times Square, a 6-foot centerpiece in a Chelsea gallery, and a portrait that now travels between museums, carrying her name in the wall text. She did not do any of that to get even. She did it because she had something worth building, and she built it. The difference matters. Revenge requires the other person to remain central to your story. Nora stopped making her family the center of her story the morning she got on a train with 2 bags and 1 name written on a Post-it note. If someone in your life has spent years deciding you do not fit their frame, let them keep that frame. Go find your own. The right people will see you clearly the moment you step into the right light. If this story stayed with you, please subscribe to Sophia Told Stories, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. We have more stories waiting for you here.